Hello and welcome to the collapse experiment. Yes, I know I'm pretty busy today, but full day of work tomorrow. Weekends are not doable for me, so here you go, getting everything in one lump sum. All right, so Sydney Watson. Yes, she is suing the Blaze. Honestly, I'm not surprised. I don't know who in their right mind thought that she was a good fit for that company, and I'm not blaming her. I don't know who thought Elijah Schaefer was a good fit for that company. Honestly, when that show popped up, and yes, I did watch that show. I think it was called We Are Here. That was the most oddball combination that anybody could have possibly put together. If somebody was to tell me to just pick two random people from YouTube and throw them in a show and make it as confusing as possible, that might be the selection. So, anyways, getting back to the topic at hand, Sydney is suing. Why am I not surprised? Well, after watching this show, good portion of spring and last summer, it just gradually and then all of a sudden went off the cliff downhill into garbage territory. I felt like it had an interesting premise at the beginning. Here Sydney is. She's an atheist. She has a lot of conservative beliefs. Then there's Elijah Schaefer. And this is an odd duck I have never really fully understood. Here's somebody that came into the spotlight after getting his ass kicked. Let's just be blatant here. He got his he had the crap beaten out of him by Antifa, and I believe he had stitches, a swollen lip. I still remember the video. He ended up on Timcast talking about the experience. But I always notice that there is something odd about this dude. You know, he's very outspoken. He's very abrasive during conversations. He loves to speak over people. He loves to correct people during a conversation. And I never really saw him as somebody who could be the host of a show. Then there's Sydney. She does really good with her solo videos where she's talking, she's giving her opinion on stuff. She occasionally shows things that she's pointing out to people during this. I never really saw her as being somebody's co-host, but she wasn't even really a co-host. Now, when I was watching this show, Elijah was the host. And then there was Sydney. And Sydney was never really acknowledged as like being a co-host, even though it was both his picture and her picture on all the advertisements, all the postings for the videos. It really should have just been his face. Because it's kind of like, and I'm using Elijah's own words here, it was kind of a retarded version of Glenn Beck. Elijah was very fond of using that word. In a sense, you know there's Glenn Beck. You know there's also Stu in the studio. And Stu sucks, Glenn's words. If you've ever heard that advertisement on the radio, you know, there is a Stu, but Stu is not on the advertising. He's not listed as a co-host. You know, his name isn't anywhere. It's just the Glenn Beck Show. And that's what Elijah's show pretty much was. It was just Elijah. And then there's Sydney. So, there was a lot of cringeworthy things that happened on this show. And a few of them involve a lot of inappropriate things that Elijah would say, mostly regarding what men and women, their place in society, how he lives his life is his business. Whether you're gay, straight, whatever, I don't really give a shit. That's your business. But he is very big on, I'm the man, I provide for my wife, my job is to keep her barefoot and pregnant, yada yada. Hey, if his wife is into that, cool. But he was also pushing a lot of other really non-conservative things. I'll put it that way. Sexual positivity. Now, usually when you hear sexual positivity, it's regarding women feeling comfortable with themselves, blah, 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 no body shaming. This was about him being a dude. And these comments were usually made towards women on the show. You also had guests that were being brought on the show, like Jack Murphy. Now, Jack Murphy, I'm surprised he was even trying to promote himself after the things that he was involved in. He kind of went under the radar. He disappeared from Timcast. I don't know how well his masculinity training to be a cuck program is going, but he was pulling in, I forget how many tens of thousands a month, trying to tell dudes how to be dudes. Meanwhile, he wrote an article about, letting other men bang your woman, because that's somehow masculine. Freaking weird. But anyways, so he ends up on the show, and this controversy is coming up. People are sending it in chat. Elijah, Sydney, nobody, not even Jack Murphy, has any control as to what somebody puts in chat or sends as a super chat. And when you send a super chat, the policy should be, although it's not for places like Timcast, hey, if you're spending $5 to send a comment to have it read on the show, you should probably read it if you're going to keep that $5. So Sydney's reading this stuff, and twice in a row, Jack Murphy and the cuck article comes up. And he belittles Sydney on the show. Elijah, who's all about being a man, doesn't say shit. So that was interesting. A few weeks later, they have a porn star, an active porn star. Now, usually the lifespan of a porn star's career is very short. This girl's still working as far as I could tell. She was discussing the industry, blah, blah, blah. This is supposed to be a conservative show, right? And Elijah's pretty much pushing this as like, oh, I'm like cool with this, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, so he has this girl on the show. You could tell in the photos and during the show that Sydney was not exactly comfortable in this situation. She's just kind of like, what the heck is going on? Like, it was very obvious she had zero say as to like the guests that were going to be on, who they would be talking to. It was all catered towards Elijah and whatever freaking kink he was into at the time. So, the other things that happened that were brought up, and I remember these rumors back when the show ended. I remember Sydney left the show, and then not long after that, the show was just gone, right? So there's no more Sydney. Nobody was really talking about like why she quit or anything. She gradually started bringing her old YouTube channel back, with not really addressing anything. And then you have all the news coming out from the Blaze. Well, it's not from the Blaze. It was basically like the rumor mill, and then it started being confirmed that Elijah was inappropriately touching women at work. They were quitting, and it got to the point with his behavior, and there's several videos, if you want to go back and look them up, where Elijah is clearly drunk while on the show. He's sweating, face is beet red. He's just mumbling about all kinds of whatever. He just wants to cut people off and just, oh, there's a man. And, yeah, it was a very unprofessional situation. So am I surprised that Sydney is now suing? No, I'm not. Like, there were several other things that the Blaze could have done. Like, yes, you have a contract. Well, for one, they have a contract with Elijah. They also have a contract with Sydney. Why is it Sydney was not offered her own show outside of We Are Here? Why wasn't that offered? And maybe it was. I don't know. Maybe we're going to learn all these little details. But it just seems like there wasn't an option given to where she would get her own show, as opposed to being a lackluster co-host. I don't know, an assistant. I mean, she's kind of treated more like an assistant on the show. Like, I don't want to read these super chats. We'll have Sydney do it. Yeah. I don't know. Like, why did she have to be on Elijah's show in order to be on the Blaze? That didn't make any sense to me. Like, why wasn't she given the opportunity to just host her own show and talk about what she wanted to talk about, as opposed to having be like Elijah's sidekick? That didn't make any sense to me. And quite frankly, I don't know what Elijah was doing before he got on the Blaze, but I never really saw any videos from him or a YouTube channel or anything for Elijah. But Sydney's been around. Not in that way. You know what I mean. She's, I followed her for a while. I know what she's about. I've seen her videos, This whole situation is just really odd to me. I don't know I don't know what the hell the Blaze was thinking with this show. I don't know how it was put together. But you could just tell Sydney was uncomfortable a lot of the time that she was on there. And the way that Elijah acted was very unprofessional. And I'm not surprised that he ended up being fired the way that he was. So, anyways, are people going to call this simping for Sydney? Sure. So that's just going to end up being the video title. But, I mean, the evidence is pretty clear. A lot of people are bitching about the wording of the lawsuit. Well, first of all, you have to file the lawsuit. And then there's going to be the exploratory period where they're gathering and looking over the evidence, because both sides have to make their case, right? And one person just can't bring in evidence that the other is not told about beforehand, so that they can prepare their arguments. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting, but odds are this is not going to go to court anyways. I don't know why everybody is bitching about this. The Blaze, in all of their wisdom, is probably going to settle, as most of the companies do when it comes to accusations like this. I mean, Sydney's probably looking at getting a nice payout of whatever she was going to be making that first year had she completed the first year and didn't have to work with Elijah the douchebag. So, anyways, and I'm going to be honest here. I've never liked Elijah. Like, I had some respect for him at first when he first popped up on the scene getting beat up by Antifa, but after that, it was like every time this dude ended up online in a video being interviewed, talking on some show, I'm just like, I can kind of see why somebody beat the shit out of him. He's probably running his mouth. He seems to have a very big issue with running his mouth. And, you know, combine that with a little bit of touchy-feely, and now the blaze, now the blaze is on fire. Things are not going good for Glenn Beck, which is really sad. I really respected and liked Glenn Beck a while back when, you know, he was on Fox News. He was kind of the outcast, you know, he was looking into Agenda 21, and he was just like, you know, it's not a conspiracy, like, this shit is real. Then he leaves Fox because they're like, we can't have some dude talking about all this truthful stuff. And then, yeah, he starts the blaze. And I'm like, good for him. All right, cool. This guy seems to know what he wants to do and how he's going to do it. And like most organizations that grow to a particular point where it's very hard to self-manage itself, you end up with situations like this. So, it's unfortunate. I liked Glenn back in the day. I don't really know like where he's at with things now, except for his radio show. And I feel like the radio show is really just what he needs to focus on at this point. It's really sad. So, anyways, that's about it for me. I have a feeling this thing's going to settle out of court anyways, just to keep things from being revealed to the public. Stuff will still get revealed through Sydney, and then people will complain that, well, we don't know this for sure because it's only coming from one side. We don't know both sides. Well, somebody's going to write a check. That's my guess. Once that check is written, I'm just going to assume that there's some guilt on the other side, because that's usually how it goes. The only time that I've ever heard people argue that wasn't a sign of guilt was with Michael Jackson paying out all these kids that were talking about things at the ranch. Well, that doesn't mean that he did it. He just wanted it to go away. Uh-huh. You keep telling yourself that and keep on typing.